Welcome everyone, I'm Izzy at Minerva. We're continuing our pattern drafting sleeve series today and we're going to be looking at the bishop sleeve. This is one that you can see in the picture right next to me here. It has quite a fitted sleeve head and then it expands to become a really big voluminous sleeve, which then comes in again at the cuff. So for the purpose of this video, we're really focusing on how to create that volume, to create that bishop sleeve volume, and our cuff is just going to be a very simple elastic cuff. It is worth noting that we're going to be doing a series all about cuffs for sleeves in the next couple of weeks. So at that point then you can add whatever type of cuff you would want to the bishop sleeve. I'm going to be using my very own bespoke sleeve block, and you can create your very own as well by following our pattern drafting series. Please do refer back to video 69 where I talk you through how to draw your own sleeve block, and then video 70 which shows you how to sew your sleeve block as well and fit it. Consequently, your sleeve block will look slightly different to mine, the one that you're going to see on the screen, but that's totally fine. The principles are exactly the same. So along with your sleeve block, you're going to need your standard pattern drafting tools, which are listed next to me here. Before we start today, I should probably mention that I am wearing the Montana midi dress by Style Arc Patterns today, and it is in our Minerva exclusive Rose Relations viscose challis. So we will link that, those two products below the video as well, if anyone's keen to make this pattern themselves. I have also filmed a sew along actually for this dress as well, so you've got a lot of support out there for you in order to achieve a lovely beautiful dress. Great, let's get straight on into our sleeve block. For the purpose of this pattern drafting exercise, I'm going to use some elastic that is 4 centimeters wide for my cuff. So the very first thing I want to do to my block is actually to remove the volume of the cuff. So let's do that together. So if I pop my elastic on the bottom of the cuff at this point, I'm just going to double check the width of it. Yeah, it's bang on 4 centimeters. So if my elastic is 4 centimeters, I might just want to add like a little bit of ease into that cuff so I can wiggle that elastic into the cuff at the bottom. So I'm actually going to draw a line that is 4.5 centimeters away from the wrist to accommodate the elastic. Then just cut along that line. The next thing we're going to do is to draw a line between the armscye. Measure that distance and then divide it by 5. So for me, my distance is 34, divided by 5 gives me a distance of 6.8. So I'm then going to divide this line into 5 equal segments, which is 6.8 centimeters apart. Next, to take your ruler and line it up with the bottom of the sleeve here so that it is parallel with the bottom of the sleeve there, and then draw a line from the sleeve head all the way to the base of the cuff, and repeat that for all the segments of the sleeve piece. Next, cut along those lines from the cuff all the way up to the sleeve head, leaving a pivot point at the sleeve head. Excellent. So once you've cut out those lines of the sleeve, we're going to start to open them out using the slash and spread method, which we've used lots of times in this pattern drafting series. We want the gaps to be even between each of the segments, and I'm just going to do a 7 centimeter increase. So sellotape that first one down, and then let's open up the next one by 7 centimeters. So just leaving a pivot point up there, we've just moved this along so that it hits the 7 centimeter gap. Stick that down so it doesn't move place. Great, do that for the next one, and then just repeat on the other side. By increasing the volume by exactly the same amount between each segment, you're making sure that the volume distribution is even around the whole of the base of the sleeve. Depending on the sleeve block that you've used, you might just want to double check that your cuff is going to fit through your hand as well as hitting over your wrist. Now on the block we've been using, the cuffs are quite generous in size, so that shouldn't be a problem, but if you're using something else that you've drafted, just double check that your cuff here is definitely going to fit round your hand as you pop the sleeve on. The final thing I want to do is just to make one quick change to the cuff. So we've checked that it's going to fit our hand, but currently we've got a diagonal line coming up from the wrist line up to the top of the cuff here, and the same on this side. All I'm going to do is just simplify that pattern piece so that it is a complete rectangle. So I'm just going to draw a line from the wrist up to the top of the cuff, which is perpendicular to the wrist line, on both sides of the pattern, on both sides of the block. And then just cut those out. Great, let's go grab some tracing paper and trace over our pattern now. To the wrist line, I am not going to add a seam allowance because I'm actually going to place that on the fold, but I will add a seam allowance to the side seam and also to the top of the cuff where it's going to attach onto the sleeve. Place on fold. A bishop sleeve cuff, cut 2 on fold. For the grain line, I actually want it to go like this, so when I fold my fabric, I'm going to have to be careful just to fold it not along the selvage, but the other way around. Wonderful, so the cuff's now done, our elasticated simple little cuff. Let's add our seam allowance to our sleeve as usual. So our 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to both side seams to start off with. Next, along the base down here, I'm just going to dot along a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance all the way along. And then I'm just going to use my pattern drafting ruler to create a nice soft curve to go all the way around. Repeat the whole same process for the sleeve head as usual. Dot it out first at 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and then draw in a nice smooth curve. Next, we're going to just draw in our notches for our front, our middle and our back. The grain line is going to follow the original centre line that ran all the way down the sleeve. The only other thing you might want to add is just a little annotation. So from 1.5 centimetres or away from the seam allowance, following the line of your block, what we want to annotate here is just that we're going to be gathering along this line here. So I'm just going to add a little dashed line between those points and then write the word gather so that I know we're going to gather between those notches. Excellent, let's cut out that pattern piece now, and we're also going to then cut it out of calico, transferring the line markings as we go. Now with this series we're just looking at pattern drafting the sleeves, so you can go and choose whichever block you want to attach this sleeve onto to check and see what it looks like. I'm just going to use my standard fitted block, and I'm going to add a seam allowance on to the arm side of my bodice as well. Right, so let's go and sew that up together now. We'll start off by sewing the sleeve together so it creates a nice little cylinder shape. With right sides together, fold the sleeve over on itself, so the right sides are together, and then just pin down the long side underarm seam. Sew that in place using your standard seam allowance. Press that seam open with an iron. Great, now what we're going to do is to prepare the gathers of this base of the sleeve, and we're going to do that by stitching 2 lines of long stitches all the way around. The first line is going to be a 5mm stitch length, and it's going to be 5mm away from the raw edge. We're going to reinforce it at the beginning, sew all the way around, and then just leave 2 strings of thread at the end. Once you've done one and you've left your strings loose at one end, we're then going to do a second line of gathering stitches, which is 1 centimetre from the raw edge. Okay, wonderful. So we've got 2 lines of stitches running all the way around the circumference of the base of the sleeve, and then we've reinforced the stitches at the beginning, and then when we've got to the end we've just left a nice long line of thread from the reel and also from the bobbin. So what we're going to do now is take the 2 strands from the reel, we're going to gather those, and we're just going to pull on them, those 2 from one side, until we start to create a bit of bunching in the fabric. And we can start to gather that along. You see that starting to gather. Brilliant. So that is the beginning of our gathering stitches for our bishop sleeve. Okay, let's move on to the cuff pattern piece now. This is reasonably straightforward, so let's take it away. Now I do appreciate that right and wrong sides are hard to tell on calico, so we're going to assume that this is the right side facing up on the screen. We're going to fold it over in half with the right sides together and just pin in place along this short end right here. Just press that open next so that it's going to sit nice and flat. Next, turn it so that the wrong sides are touching and the right side is then facing out all the way around that little tube. So that should just fit on. Perfect. Okay, let's insert the elastic. So go and grab some safety pins and off we go. At this point, we're going to grab our elastic and we're not going to do any crazy maths with this. We're literally just going to wrap it around our wrist to see how tight we want it. This is obviously all measured up for our bespoke size. So this is a really nice way of doing it. So just wrap it around until it feels, you know, comfortable, and pop that over there. Just make sure that you've got a bit of an overlap of 1.5 centimetres, so it's overlapping by 1.5 centimetres at the point where it feels comfortable. Make a note of that and then just cut along that line there. What we're going to do next is we're going to baste the cuff in place. So the right side is facing out right now, and I'm just going to pop a few pins around so that it holds it in place where I want it. Now, we do, as we sew, need to leave a little gap to allow the elastic to feed through into this cuff. So all I'm going to do is just to put 2 sets of double pins into my fabric to know that I need to leave a gap at that point to be able to feed the elastic in. I then sew around the whole of this circumference here using a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Grab a pair of safety pins, pop 1 pin onto the end of the elastic, pop the other safety pin through the other end, and then just attach it onto the cuff as a little reference so it won't shift around as we feed the elastic through. Wonderful. Once you've got it through like that, we want to just overlap one piece of elastic over the other by 1.5 centimetres and then just sew along there to secure it. Lovely, so there we have it, a nice bit of elastic. It's all nice and stretchy at that point. And then we can just feed the elastic back into the casing because we've stretched it all the way out, haven't we, when we did that sewing. So let's just feed it all the way back so it's nice and tucked into the inside of that gorgeous cuff. Okay, so there we have it, beautiful. Now we have got this little opening here, haven't we? So all we're going to do now is just pull that so it's nice and taut, and then sew and continue just to sew our basting line of stitches all the way around. Just like that. So now it's stitched, the gap there is stitched up, and it's fully, so the elastic is fully encased now. So that's going to create a really cute little cuff which we're going to be able to get on over our wrist, and then it's just going to hold the whole of the bishop sleeve in place. Great, okay, so we've got our sleeve here and our cuff here, and these two need to be attached. The right side of our sleeve is currently facing out, and our sleeve is with the right sides together, so the right side is on the inside. So what we want to do is actually to put the cuff with the seam here matching up with the seam of the sleeve. So we're putting the cuff into the sleeve and then just pin it in place. Just pop one little pin in there. Okay, and now what we're going to try and do is gather the rest of the base of the bishop sleeve so that it matches the circumference of the cuff. Just going to push it around that way and do it like this. Quite a lot of gathering to do. Distribute those gathers nice and evenly, and then pin the cuff to the sleeve in place. Now comes the tricky bit where we need to sew that tiny little cuff detail all together, so just take your time as you do it. You may want to baste it in place first and then sew it for real, but we're aiming for a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Now if you're doing this as your final garment, you may well want to overlock that, but this is basically the base of the sleeve cuff done now. So you can see that's really beginning to take shape now. Next, we're going to sew the sleeve to the bodice, and we've allowed a 1.5 centimetre seam allowances to the sleeve and to the bodice at this point. If you're not sure how to do this, you can refer back to video 70, where I talk you through step by step how to attach a sleeve to a bodice. But yeah, we'll just do it pretty quickly today here, because we know that the block already fits us. Okay, so I've got a very simple bodice here next to me on the screen in front of me, and all I'm going to do is to attach my sleeve onto the bodice just so that you guys at home can see what it's going to look like when it's on, which is always helpful, isn't it? So this is a very, very simple bodice I've drafted, and I've added a seam allowance to the arm side to accommodate fitting the sleeve into the block. The right sides of the both garments are facing up on the screen, and we're just going to attach our two side seams together with a little pin to start off with. Great. Now flip the bodice over so that the right sides of the sleeve and the right sides of the bodice are together, and then just pin underarm between the notches and the underarm seam. So you've got one notch at the front and you've got one double notch at the back. Next, we want to attach the shoulder seam to the sleeve, and you should have another notch on the sleeve piece here. So attach that into place by pinning it in place. And next, we're just going to pin in place all the way around the remainder of the sleeve head between the notches and the shoulder seam. Once you pin that in place, you can then stitch. I recommend basting it in place first, either by hand or on your machine, just to ease in any of the excess fabric from the sleeve. Fantastic. Once you've got one sleeve in, you can then pop the other one on, and let's see what that looks like. There we have it. Our sleeve pattern piece has been transformed to make a beautiful bishop sleeve with a very simple elasticated cuff at the bottom. This is such a dramatic look, isn't it? Obviously with calico this has quite a static look to it, but you can imagine this in some drapey viscose or silk, even chiffon. It would just drape really beautifully. So hopefully this little technique has really helped you to kind of open up your eyes to see what potential you could do. I've been Izzy at Minerva. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a privilege, as always, to talk you through pattern drafting and to unlock all that potential with you. As ever, do create an account on our Minerva website. Feel free to comment below in the videos. We always love to hear from our maker community. Feel free to upload your photos, what you've been doing with the pattern drafting course. We absolutely love to see what you guys are making. So thank you for joining me. I will see you next week.